everyone, welcome back with Daily Devotions with Pastor Peter. We are in Genesis 17 today, and this is where we get the name change from Abram to Abraham. And I've been kind of using the names back and forth interchangeably, and that's my mistake because I'm so used to calling him Abraham because that really ended up being his name. But Abram first and then Abraham. And a change of a name is really important because a name gives you the identity that you have. My parents named me Peter partly because they wanted me to be like Peter in the Bible, but also rock, firm, solid, and also because my head was so big, my parents almost got me operated on to get me out of my mom. So that was the other reason why, I guess. That's what they said. I don't know if that was serious or jokingly, but I was an 8-pound baby, 8 pounds plus baby, and so for a small 4'11", I think 4'10" mother, yeah, I was kind of a big baby. However, names, really important. Let's continue on with Genesis chapter 17, and this is what it says. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Serve me faithfully and live a blameless life. I will make a covenant with you by which I will guarantee to give you countless descendants. At this, Abram fell face down on the ground. And then God said to him, This is my covenant with you. I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. What's more, I am changing your name. It will no longer be Abram. Instead, you will be called Abraham, for you will be the father of many nations. I will make you extremely fruitful. Your descendants will become many nations, and kings will be among them. I will confirm my covenant with you and your descendants after you, from generation to generation. This is the everlasting covenant. I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And I will give you the entire land of Canaan, where you now live as a foreigner. To you and your descendants it will be their possession forever, and I will be their God, and I will be their God. Then God said to Abraham, Your responsibility is to obey the terms of the covenant. You and all your descendants have this continual responsibility. This is the covenant that you and your descendants must keep. Each male among you must be circumcised. You must cut off the flesh of your foreskin as a sign of the covenant between me and you. From generation to generation, every male child must be circumcised on the 8th day after his birth. This applies not only to members of your family, but also to the servants born in your household and the foreign-born servants whom you have purchased. All must be circumcised. Your bodies will bear the mark of my everlasting covenant. Any male who fails to be circumcised will be cut off from the covenant family for breaking the covenant. Then God said to Abraham, Regarding Sarai, your wife, her name will no longer be Sarai. From now her name will be Sarah, and I will bless her and give you a son from her. Yes, I will bless her richly, and she will become the mother of many nations. Kings of nations will be among her descendants. Then Abraham bowed down to the ground, but he laughed to himself in disbelief. How could I become a father at age 100, he thought. And how can Sarah have a baby when she is 90 years old? So Abraham said to God, May Ishmael live under your special blessing. But God replied, No, Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a son for you. You will name him Isaac, and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants as an everlasting covenant. As for Ishmael, I will bless him also, just as you have asked. I will make him extremely fruitful and multiply his descendants. He will become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will be confirmed with Isaac, who will be born to you, and Sarah about this time next year. When God had finished speaking, he left Abraham. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and every male in his household, including those born there and those he had bought. Then he circumcised them, cutting off their foreskins, just as God had told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and Ishmael his son was 13. Both Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised on that day, along with all the other men and boys of the household. Whether they were born there or bought as servants, all were circumcised with him. My friends, this is a tough chapter, and it's not a PG version either. Here's the reality. God promised something to Abraham that was totally amazing. Now, Abraham changed his name, Sarai changed his name, and because the name changing gives them the identity that God has given them. Sarai, if I'm not mistaken, was a name that was given to some Eastern moon or something religious on that sense. But now that their name were changed, they now have their identity based in God. Abram fell. We see Abram's respect for God. This was, a covenant that God said that was going to be with him. And again, he was reaffirming that, he will be the father of a multitude of nations. And the name Abraham means father of many nations. And, God said he will confirm they will live in that land. In Canaan, they'll possess forever. But the next thing they were supposed to do is they were supposed to circumcise every male in the family. This is the hard one. What is circumcision? Circumcision on a male penis. So what is there is there's a covering of skin over the actual penis. And so what is done is they would cut that skin off. Now you're thinking to yourself, is this something painful, or is it something, what is it and why? And here's the reality. This is a physical sign of commitment to God. Why did God choose the male organ? Why did God choose the penis? And the reason, and I think the reason is, and I've heard this in the years that I've listened to sermons and became a pastor, is you cut the foreskin off as a sign of a covenant between me and you. This is a symbol of total commitment. And the reason why is that's a very sensitive area for the male in general. I mean, that's where your nerve endings are. That's where sexual pleasure comes from. But then that's also a place where you don't just reveal to anybody. It's a very private part. And when you cut off the foreskin, it's not a fun thing. I know of a guy who got circumcised in his teens, and he said it was painful. He couldn't walk for a week, and I'm sure that if he did it during this day and age, they probably used anesthesia. I don't know if they did, but imagine getting a needle in that area, and then not only that, getting it cut off, and then the bleeding, and then the care for it. It's not fun. But then this is a sign of total commitment to God. And not only that, Abraham had to do it for not only him, but his son, his servants, every member of his family, anybody who's in the household, anyone who follows him has to bear that mark, and that mark of commitment. And so that's what happens when people see, if anyone want to check, they would know that, hey, this person has been committed to the Israelites who mutilated their genitalia. But it's not the mutilation that really matters, the fact that it's commitment, and it's an area where it's not necessarily necessary to keep. And therefore, God called him to do that. It's a commitment. The question for us is, how committed are we to God to be willing to do something like that to our physical bodies? See, God is testing Abraham and all who follow him. And this is something that continued on, and all the way till now, people still are circumcised. Medically, people wonder if it's still necessary. Supposedly it's cleaner, and less infections that take place. But at the same time, we're living in a day and age where things are very clean. We have soap and water and all these things. Do we need to? And the answer probably is no, not necessary. But it's still a symbol of commitment and bowing down to God. And we see Abraham here too. He bows down, face down to God, and does his thing when he sees God. Now, so that was a thing, a personal commitment that requires a sacrifice from us in receiving a gift that God has given us, which is, being blessed beyond count. God will bless Sarai, she will have a son. That is phenomenal. A 90-year-old person having a child, that's impossible. I understand why he would laugh about that, because not only that it physically is unable to happen, but mentally, emotionally, physically being able to care for a child is impossible. So Abraham bowed down to the ground in disbelief in verse 17. How can I become a father at age 100, he thought. And how can Sarah have, have a baby then? But God said, Ishmael will be blessed, because that's what Abraham said. Just do it through Ishmael. That was already a miracle in itself, that Abraham was still able to have children. But this more, again, shows that when God blesses us, he doesn't bless us necessarily through our own strength, but he blesses us through something impossible. And some of us in our life, we may be going through something impossible, something that's out of our hands. And that, more reason than not, is for us to give thanks to God when he comes through with his promise or comes through with a blessing. Then we have to say, it's not me, but it's God in me who is able to do that. Now, going back to what happened earlier, yes, God will bless Ishmael, but Ishmael would not be the chosen nation. The covenant is not with Ishmael. Even though Abraham did have a child outside of God's plan, God still fulfills his promise by blessing Abraham's children. But then it's with Sarah. So, we look at verse 23. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and every male in his household, including those born there and those he had bought. And guess what he did? He didn't waver. It was on that very day. On that day, he circumcised everybody. Ouch. And yikes. I don't know how many people he had in his household. That was him, his son. That in itself, getting a knife to that area and cutting something off. I can understand, even with, okay, so within the Japanese culture, I know that they break off their fingers to show loyalty or whatever it is, or if you owe something, you've seen it in movies. I don't know exactly what that means, but breaking off a finger is one thing. Cutting off a finger is one thing. Cutting off a part of your flesh deliberately to show commitment to God for you and your son, and listening to them scream in pain or yell in pain, or maybe they're not, but you know the pain they're going through because Abraham did it to himself. He survived. Imagine him walking around for the next week or so and having that place healed. And not only that, everyone else in his household had to go through that. Then he circumcised them. This is verse 23. He continued on. Then he, that means Abraham, circumcised them, cutting off their foreskins just as God has told him. Verse 26 confirmed that both Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised on that very day, along with other men and boys in the household. Whether they were born there or not, all were circumcised with him. Again, this is confirmation in the triplet form. They did it, he definitely did it, he did it to all the men, it was the same day, did it all to the boys, it was all done, all at the very end. It's in verse 27, all were circumcised. And I'm thinking of this, my friends, ouch, and I'm saying this again, ouch, but the second part is that this is major commitment to a God. I mean, what kind of interaction did he have with God that he was so willing to go through this? And for some of us in our lives too, we may be going through some problems. We may be going through some situations. We may be distant from God, but what would we be willing to do for God once we encountered him, once we realize what he's going to bless us with? What are we willing to give up? You see, for me, I decided to go into ministry because God touched my life in a way, in a very, I was very sure that he called me into service, called me to serve him. He didn't call me to be a youth pastor. He didn't call me to be a music pastor. He didn't call me to be an interpreter in a church. And those things I've done all, or an administrative pastor, but he called me to serve him. And since that time, yes, I've wavered back and forth in my calling in my young years, and then I went into ministry right away out of college. And it was interesting. It was difficult, but I gave up my life to serve him. And there were challenges along the way. There were a lot of challenges along the way. The things that I thought I deserved, the things that I thought I could have had if I wasn't a pastor. God ended up blessing me with everything I ever wanted and needed. He took care of me, and he continues to take care of me all the way to today. There's nothing that I need, and there's definitely nothing else that I would ever want unless it's just being materialistic, and that's not necessary. I have more things that I could ever be blessed with. And God has taken care of me. And the only difference is that I see through my commitment to him that he's blessed me while I'm still alive. The difference for me and Abraham is Abraham only saw through his sons. And we'll get to that in the next chapter too. God blessed Abraham with a miracle. And not only that, it took that long, up to 100 years old, to be able to see the fruition of what God said. For me, I don't know if I have that long of patience, but he did. And the question for us is, would we be willing to do that as well too? Not only the patience, but the pain that goes with it. Unbelievable. But that shows commitment. We may not be perfect. I may not be perfect. Abraham was definitely not perfect. But we still had the same trajectory of going towards Christ and moving up and up and up and up and up. Even though sometimes it goes down and then goes up, it goes down and up, but we still follow him. So my friends, where do you lie with this? When God reveals himself to you, are you willing to give up something if he asks you for it? Maybe it's painful. Maybe it's something physical. Maybe it's something emotional. Maybe it's your life. But what are you willing to give up after experiencing the goodness of God? Take care, my friends. We'll see you in the next one.